Well, let me tell you a little bit about my backstory so you kind of know where I've been and how I ended up doing what I'm doing. So, been an entrepreneur now for about 18 years. Been working in my profession for about 25. Initially started out as a CPA and did a lot of business tax and financial planning work with closely held business owners at what used to be two of the big six accounting firms, KPMG Peat Mark and Ernst& and Young. I was really fortunate and blessed to kind of like you, kind of be exposed to a lot of stuff. Working for closely held businesses and two of the big six accounting firms, and so I parlayed a lot of the wisdom that I learned to help benefit myself. So even as an employee in my late 20s, we had accumulated a seven-figure net worth, and we're in unfamiliar territory to say the least. But it was fun. It was good. My fortunes came to a screeching halt right around 9/11 because obviously you know what happened to
Oh
the
yeah.
country. Took a beating in the stock market, had a portfolio of almost a dozen real estate properties that all went under because I went through 18 months of unemployment and I didn't have any assets, didn't have any income coming in, so I couldn't pay on my property. So they all pretty much went into foreclosure. So we ended up filing bankruptcy and kind of getting a fresh start in 2003. But at the same time, because I couldn't find reemployment, this was like God's way of letting me know, hey, I didn't make you to be an employee for the rest of your life. I called you to be an entrepreneur. And if I got to close every door to make sure you recognize that I've shut that door, that's what I'm going to do. That's literally what he did. I didn't know about it till after the fact.
Yeah.
But so started my own consulting business, and was traveling the country, meeting with small business owners as part of a management and tax consulting team. So we would come in, we'd implement strategies to help the company grow, sometimes with 2x or 3x their revenues. But when you do that, you create increasing profitability. So now you got a tax problem. So we'd
Yeah.
also institute a proactive tax plan that would show them how they could save 5 to 6 figures annually on taxes. So fun times, learned a lot, helped a ton of businesses. And God was just very, very faithful. Literally in 5 years, we went from being broke and bankrupt to being financially independent. So I'm 34, 2008, seven-figure net worth, 6 figures in passive income. I'm like at the top of the mountain. I basically semi-retired because I was financially independent at that point. I learned very quickly what a lot of people say about in retirement. It's fun for the first 3 to 6 months.
That's about how it is when I take a week off of work.
Exactly. It's like, I got to get back to doing something. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what I did. I unretired and came back out into the workforce and started doing financial planning. So I built a financial planning practice. Then I added the investment advisory side to that. And then in 2012, I released my book, Winning the Money Game, Separating the Myths from the Truth, Everything You Don't Know About Achieving Financial Independence. Because what I found was in the financial services industry, the whole industry was like spewing lies out to the consumer to just do things that kind of benefited their back pocket, but not necessarily the consumer. So I identified 9 myths. I exposed them. I showed how I avoided those myths and how that led me to go from broke to being financially independent in 5 years. Released the book. It did exceptionally well. And it was a bestseller on Amazon.
Oh wow, that's
So
good.
it was, for my first book, I was like, man, that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
So Huffington Post had me, they reached out and they said, hey, will you blog for our personal finance division? I'm like, sure, why
Oh
not?
wow. Yeah.
I did that for a couple of years, got a bunch of like PR. I ended up on Fox. I ended up on Fox News, Fox Business, Chicago Tribune. I was on a bunch of talk shows, just a whole bunch of stuff, really cool stuff. So it's like I said, I'm at the mountaintop moment in my life. Like life could not be better, right? And then 2014 hits. And in that year, it literally felt like the rug was pulled from up under me. I suffered two devastating business betrayals that year, wiped out my net worth, 7 figures plus in losses.
Golly.
And yeah, it was tough. My income then dropped to about a third of what it used to be. One of the business betrayals was sort of like a classic Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. You probably remember that from a few years back, right? The largest Ponzi scheme to ever hit our current $50 billion. Every major Hollywood actor was victimized by that. The problem, though, is in our case, the Bernie that perpetrated the fraud for us, he fled the country. Bernie was brought to justice. He's in, bars and stuff. The guy who led our fraud, he Like we think he's in Switzerland somewhere. We don't know where he
Yeah.
is. And because it wasn't, $50 billion, it was only 200 million. The SEC, who investigated, because I was an investment advisor, they said, you know what, we're not about to expend any money to track this guy down. I found out 2.5 years later. So this happened in 2014. 2.5 years later, it's 2016. I find out that they've decided to save face. They're going to file complaints against me and my companies in an attempt to try to hold me responsible
Oh,
for my
wow.
losses and my
What in the
clients'
world?
losses.
That's
I
crazy.
know, crazy. So that ate up 2 years of my life, multiple six figures in legal bills. I basically ran out of money trying to convince them to kind of reconsider their position.
Yeah, really.
And so I ended up settling the case. That was like the best option for me. I settled the case with them on a neither admit nor deny basis, which was good.
Yeah.
But that cost me dearly. I had to pay out over
Oh,
$320,000.
yeah, I bet.
Yeah, to settle the case. I had to agree to give up my investment advisory license. I had my CFP license, Certified Financial Planner license. I gave that up. I ended up keeping my CPA and my insurance license, but I couldn't get errors and omissions, and it just was a mess. My investment advisory business basically got buried underneath me. I wasn't getting any income anymore. So now, even after my income was down to a third of what it used to be, I was down to like a tenth of what I used to. I was basically below the poverty line in terms of income. So here I am, 2018, the end of 2018. My business is dead. My assets are gone. I'm basically qualifying for government cheese if I want it, right?
Yeah.
And then my reputation, that's pretty much shot, because if you
Yeah.
Google my name, you see all this nice stuff that the SEC
Yeah,
has to say about me.
golly.
So I found myself in a very, very unusual spot. And it was really pretty tough. The first 6 months of 2019, we were that close to filing bankruptcy again. And if it hadn't been for God's providence in my life, the mentors and coaches that I worked with throughout that entire ordeal, I wouldn't be here today. Thankfully, by the end of 2019, God literally resurrected my coaching and consulting business. And I ended up the year in 2019 doing $10,000 a month, feeling pretty good about myself.
Yeah.
Until I had a conversation with a buddy of mine. He was also in the coaching and consulting space. So with everything that I've been dealing with since 2014, I kind of lost track with him. Kevin and I hadn't spoken a bunch of years. So I'm having this conversation with him. I'm like, dude, how you been? What you been up to? And he said, and I quote, he said, dude, I feel like I have died and gone to heaven. I'm like, what is that all about? He's like, the work that I'm doing, man, it's just phenomenal. I'm like, so like, tell me more. Like, what are you doing? He said, well, dude, I can basically find any business $100,000 or more in top line recurring revenue in under an hour. And they don't even have to spend a penny more than they're currently spending in marketing or advertising.
Wow.
I heard the comment and then I laughed. I'm like, you're full of crap, right? He's like, no, dude, I'm as serious as a heart attack. I'm like, well, how long you been doing this? About 6 years. I start doing the math. I'm like, that's about the same time crap fell out for me, right? The bottom fell out. I'm like, okay, that makes sense, because we hadn't kept in touch in a while. And then that was the end of the conversation. So he went his way, I went my way. We both had other appointments. But I got to tell you, that conversation with him, it stuck with me. I mean, I had worked for KPMG and E&Y, really two prestigious firms doing really, really cool stuff. I felt like the stuff we were doing, even when I opened up my consulting practice in 2003, was pretty cool as well. But in 25 years in my professional career, not once had I ever heard a more powerful positioning statement for coaches and consultants relative to what they did. So after a few sleepless nights, Kevin, what you doing? Get back on the phone. I'm like, dude, you got to tell me more about this, right? And so he laid it all out for me. And as he lays it all out, I'm like, so how much you charge your clients? He said, well, right now I'm charging them $3,000 a month, but I'm raising my prices to $5,000. Like 5,000 for the year. No, it's $5,000 a month. And he goes, and they're doing that for a 12-month agreement. And I'm like, you got to understand, Remember I said I ended the year 2019 doing about $10,000 a month. The most I'd had anybody pay for a coaching agreement was $12,500 over the course of 6 months with me. I was like, yeah, I'm a bad man, commanding premium prices. I thought I was where I needed to be. Then comes Kevin, who's talking about, yeah, I'm only taking on clients now that are paying me $5,000 a month. I'm like, OMG. Don't I feel that small?
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, tell me, like, what's your retention rate with these clients you're working with? He goes, nearly 100%. He goes, now every once in a while, I got to fire a client because they're not following what I tell them to do, right? And I'm like, I don't really have time for that because I want to try to help improve these people's lives. He says it's at the point now where he doesn't take on any new client unless they're doing $5,000 a month. I go, well, how many clients you working with right now? About 15. Like, dude, I hadn't been in the 5th grade in a long time, but by my rough math, it sounds like you're making about $500,000 a year. Yeah. And you say you're spending like 2 hours. So you're spending 30 hours a month, 2 hours a week per client, and you're generating that much. He's like, yeah, that sounds about right. I'm like, dude, like where have you been the last 6 years of my life, right? So I was like, okay, so you really got to like show me how to do this. Like, how are you doing what you're doing? Because I'm still like stuck in the state of disbelief about how do you find a business $100,000 in less than an hour, right? Like, I said, well, you got an hour to spare? Like, yeah, I got nothing but time. So we sit down. He basically just uncorks everything and